Welcome to all our listeners and viewers all over the globe. We're happy to launch in our series, The Moving Stories, the first conversation interview with leading figures of therapies and method that has complementary and interrelated therapies that go side by side or hand in hand with neuromovement and the Feldenkrais and our neurodevelopmental movement learning approach. With us today is Paul Madaule. Hello, Paul.
I'm Paul.
Hi, Paul. If you ever read the book of Norman Doidge, The Brain's Way of Healing Itself, there's a whole chapter or two. I'm not sure. I don't remember.
No, the chapter on Feldenkrais, one on
yeah, exactly,
and that's ours.
That's yours. Actually, what's the first thing? Actually, we want to lead the conversation through more anecdotal, less scientific. We will touch upon scientific points, but your life story is really interesting. Do you mind kind of share your life story, how you got to be a leading figure in this area of listening and the connection to development?
Well, I think it's because I started at the right time. I was at the right time and the right place for the right reasons. I was suffering from what was called dyslexia at the time. As you can hear, I'm French. And that was was living in a small town in the south of France. And dyslexia, and that we're talking about the 50s and the 60s. Dyslexia was known, and the way to improve it was a version of speech therapies that in France we call orthophonie, and tutoring, like a one-to-one. And I went through this during basically all my school curriculum, right from first grade, where they discovered I couldn't read, and I could, and to basically the later grade, because it's only at 18 years old, or after dropout from school. First of all, I start repeating grades, because that was a way you deal with kids who are not doing well. You just repeat and repeat. And I think I repeated 3 grades, and then I basically drop out. And it happened that in the dropping out in a small town in the south of France, there were not a lot of activity during the day when everybody is at school. But at a bicycle ride from my town was a monastery. And it happened that I knew someone there, one of the monks. And from time to time, I was going to spend the day there. As you can see, I was already at that time interested in art. And that was the only place around my town where art was produced. They had workshop of different, and by going there, I kind of befriend one of the monks who one day showed up at the door of my house with a car that he had borrowed from the monastery to pick me up back to the monastery, because it was a doctor there in that monastery who was helping them with, I didn't know at the time really what he was doing there, but because he was staying at the monastery for extended period of time, and monks need some distraction, he was giving from time to time a lecture to the monks in the evening on what he was doing in Paris in his center. And he was one day he was talking about a course he was giving on dyslexia. And when he started describing the dyslexic child, how symptoms and so on, outside of the classroom, because that's what really interested Tomatis, is dyslexia is not just reading and writing, it goes beyond that. One of the monks the monks who knew me, recognized me and picked me up from my house. And well, this person was Dr. Tomatis, who has been my mentor, a little bit my equivalent of Feldenkrais for you people, Daniel. He was the one who, first of all, saw me, encouraged me, advised me to convince I was 18 years old at that time, convinced my parents to send me to his center, the Centre du Langage in Paris. That was 1967. And from there, I started a program which allowed me to not only read and write better. In fact, the read and write was part of the chain of events, but to basically listen better, while my hearing was perfectly right. Now we have words to talk about those things. We are talking about auditory processing, central auditory processing. We are talking about people who have this kind of difficulty, ADD, ADHD. I think at another time of my life, I would have been diagnosed that way because I was very much that. And I have to say, the beauty of having experienced a difficulty and having overcome it is that you are very much inside it, and you can vibrate very closely with the people who suffer the same type of difficulty. And that has been perhaps the strength of my clinical life, is that I could really quickly understand what's going on. Kids didn't have to tell me too much, and I didn't ask too much either. And also the fact that the school problem of a learning disability is basically secondary to other things, which have to do with relating to others, listening to others, and those filters which might happen, some distortion, which makes that your reality, and that is in general anybody, we all have our own reality, we all have our own perception of the world. Starting with languages, I have a perception of the world which is still French, in the way I'm hearing the French language, and I still speak with a French accent. This is, after 40 years of living in Canada, I'm still, this is my perception. And the beauty of the world, I think, the beauty of humankind is that we all have our perception of the world. But it's also the problem of the humankind, is that we all view things in a slightly different way, which makes misunderstanding, disagreeing, very much, for me, it's very into a neurological system. That's the way we are wired. We all have a system of perception which is different. As I'm talking about listening, but you can multiply that to all the sensory modalities, which means that the problem is that when this system is not working well enough to able you to do what you need to do, you become disabled. Disability is when, from a sensory perspective, when distortion as such that you are not able to absorb the work you should, the world as you should.
It's interesting because it's actually speaking to things that we wanted to discuss and that are actually, first of all, when you say listening, my first interpretation is actually when you say listening to your body is actually listening, it's not the hearing. Parents or people who don't know it, we're talking about attention. It actually involves everything. Every function is the listening. Yeah. But can you speak to, we saw a movie, The Child That You Are?
That you do have.
Or child that you have, okay. And you spoke about the first nerve that is myelinating, right? The hearing nerve. And it's interesting because we're talking about hearing and listening, but actually it's I'm asking you, can you relate to the vestibular system? Are you taking it into consideration because it's the first maybe function of senses, but it's also a movement?
Absolutely. When we're talking about the nerve first to myelinize, we're not just talking about the hearing nerve,
right?
We're talking about the cochlear vestibular nerve. Okay, as the first, really, if we consider the vestibular sense as a sense, which we should, it's not in the list of the 5 senses that you learn at school, but it's a sense, the cochlear proprioceptive, it's a sense, it is the first which really developed right in the embryonic life. I don't know exactly how many weeks, but it's really in the 21st weeks, it's really developed. Myelinization comes a little bit later, it's halfway through the prenatal life. But these are the first sense which start developing. Now, one of the great contributions of this man who has been my mentor, Dr. Tomatis, who, by the way, was an ear specialist, a ear, nose, and throat specialist, ENT, otorhinolaryngologist in French, and phoniatrist, which means working on voice. It's very important to understand that dimension of Tomatis and his work and the work that I have learned from him. The voice is extremely important. And we will talk, I hope we will have time to talk about that later. But going back to what you're saying about the vestibular, what Tomatis did, and particularly to explain at the beginning, to even explain reading, writing, spelling, and so on, is that you do not, we have an inner ear, which is both the cochlear system and the vestibular system. And when you stimulate one, you stimulate the other. One way or the other. I mean, you work on movement, you work on the cochlea. You work on the cochlea, you work on movement. Of course, because I'm working on sound, because that is my point of departure, I know that stimulating the ear induces movement that we call dancing. Several type of way of hearing, several, music organized in a certain way is going to induce a certain type of movement. This is the visual, for me, the best visualization that I can give of this interconnection between the vestibular system and the cochlear system. And that's why, while working with listening, stimulating with sound, sound information, sound stimulation, we, particularly when we work, not only, but particularly when we work with very young children, we start seeing things happening in the body, in the posture, in the movement, in the freedom of movement. And at the same time, we see a child who is more present, more with it, more with you, more attentive, more ready to get the information in, but also a body which is more ready to absorb it. The best image I can give you is the image of the rabbit. A rabbit, when start listening, will start switching on his auditory system, translate from hearing, la, 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 with his ears in the back and in the middle, and something happens, start listening, the ears go up, the posture goes straight. It's really what happens.
Body engages.
Which means that it's both sides which need to be worked together, if you want.
Since you're talking about the rabbit, just thinking out loud, is it the rabbit may be that this function is more on a reflexive level or some more primitive level, but we have the ability to go and inhibit or listening at a higher level, not a reflexive level. Can you?
Yes, exactly. The brain is a kind of a layering, which
starts
at a certain level with a rabbit, which goes at a higher level with a human. But we still have an autonomous nervous system. We still have and particularly with children who have difficulty to move to higher levels, they react in a very reflect way, which we have to work with, inhibit, in order to permit them to go further. The image of the rabbit for me is simply to visualize the idea that the ears perk up, the body straighten up. It shows what happens to us when we listen. It's more discreet. We don't have our ears picking up, but they're moving. But we have a system in the middle ear, which is poorly understood, but which was very important in Tomatis' work, is those two muscles, the smallest of the body and extensors. That they are the most difficult to reach. They are the most difficult to manipulate, if you want, okay? To touch. Well, that's what music does for us. It's to touch, to manipulate, and to train, if you want, those two muscles. Because we cannot go and touch it like you do when you do ABM work, when you do Feldenkrais work. We do it through sound. It's kind of call it an inner massage, if you want.
It's really interesting to get to this, the interconnection or the point of relationship between the musculature, and you're talking about these very fine little muscles in the ear which are managing the hearing and the listening, and the brain, right? And this is like the way we think, like we're using touch and we're using movement, but we're interested in that point of interface between the physical self and the perception of self and the perception of the environment in the brain. So I hadn't made that distinction in your and Tomatis's approach of that there's actually there's a level in which there's the muscular interconnection in that accessing the brain. Yeah.
Yes.
When we talk about movement, we're not using just a movement as a physical movement. We're relating to voice, the tonation. The thing is to create distinctions, minute distinction, as as the brain is capable of doing it more and more. We use less and less stimulation, and then that takes me to what Matty is saying, is the Tomatis or the listening therapy. Are you relating to the paradigm of stimulation, or the brain as an information system, which actually its job is to distinguish between different stimulation and levels of stimulation?
What I know in the work that you're doing, is this concept of fine differentiations, which is very important in order to help the child, for example, to gain or regain a function. Okay.
Yeah.
Fine differentiation, you can do this. You can look at it the same way with what we call listening. For example, it's a very interesting and very easy thing to do. You take a range of sounds. Okay. It's a test that we are using all the time, which I learned from Tomatis. Extremely simple. You take a range of tones that you have been of 1 octave to half octave to 1 octave difference between them. You go from higher, the highest, not the highest, but very high in the spectrum of what you can perceive, and you go down to the lowest. Okay? You ask the child, you give those bib at a normal volume, 50 decibel, normal, comfortable, easy to hear for someone who is no hearing problem. And you just ask the child, after being sure that he understands the concept of higher and lower, which we explain, and sometimes might get into the way for children less than 5, 6 years old, okay? Which means that this test only works later. You just ask them, do you hear this sound higher or lower? And we just go, without even fooling them, we just go from higher to lower, beep, 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 beep. You cannot believe the number of children and adults, for that matter, who make confusion. And they make confusion either in the high frequency range, or they make confusion in the medium frequency range, or in the low frequency range, or on the right ear or the left ear, because we test both. Which means that tonal differentiation, a very important element of receiving information. If you know what a phoneme is a complex set of sounds which has a meaning, which when put together with other, give us a meaning. We produce 13 phonemes per second, average. Imagine what happened with a child who hear only 3 or 4 of those phonemes, and perhaps even hear them a little bit slower because it takes a little bit of time for the ear to send the brain, auditory processing delay, okay, which is very well known as one of the root cause of learning disability. What I'm saying is that differentiation from our perspective, which is, I know is important in yours, start with the way you perceive sounds, the way you perceive the world. If you are not able to differentiate, you are living in a cloud. You are living in the fog. And this fog can be thicker, thinner, can affect the frequency of language, medium range, can affect the frequency which give light to information, which is a high frequency. For me, light frequency are like the light of colors. Okay, if you do not have high frequency in your perception, everything is grayish green, grayish blue, grayish red, etc., etc. You give the high frequency, wow, the color come alive. Okay? And lower frequency, difficulty perceiving, differentiating in the lower range, body image. That is where the cochlea connect with the vestibular system. That we use that as a way to understand where the child is in the fog.
Yeah.
Sorry, I always move out of your question, but that is my way of presenting our perspective, if you want.
It's beautiful hearing that with this incredible color right behind you.
Yeah.
So it's very.
We have lots of color around us in the center.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that you're, and which I understand comes from Tomatis, but this appreciation of the primacy, the fundamental importance of listening, and the that aspect of our ability to perceive the environment and ourself. And this thing that Eitan brought up about how Feldenkrais felt the same way about movement. He felt movement was the fundamental language of the nervous system, the most basic. And the fact that they're traveling the same nervous tissue to get to the brain is really interesting, those signals. But I think one thing we're really interested in, which comes across in your work, is how when we support a child to refine their ability, or an adult, to refine their ability to perceive the environment with greater clarity and greater distinction, how it changes their sense of self and their ability to express themselves, their ability to organize their action to be more successful and more engaged in life. Mm-hmm. So it's something we're interested in our work, and we of course do it in our way. But I think we do invite also in this conversation, like looking at stories. Your personal story is really interesting, which we've all studied and read about in preparation for this. But I'm sure there's stories of children that you've worked with too, who through this approach, something changes dramatically in other domains of their functioning. That is something about them becoming more fuller versions of themselves and being able to express themselves and connect and engage in the world. So that's another piece that we're interested in, is this kind of emergence of self and how the perception and refining perception can support that process for us and for the children that we work with.
Mm-hmm. Which means that you would like me to comment on some of the people that we meet?
Yeah, you could. I mean, you don't have to in this moment, but it's something that we're interested in just in terms of making use of this conversation for parents.
Right.
We're going to share this to take it from these kind of more theoretical levels to the concrete. And this, we find story is an evocative way to do that. So,
yeah. I can tell because I referred to Paul. Actually, I know Paul. I wouldn't say no, but we had a long conversation a year ago after I referred a family that I'm working here with great results to the center. And then I'm working with the kids, and we're working actually mutually, but from different provinces and different times. But and I've done that in the past in Israel when I worked with autistic kids, and I sent them to Tomatis. And I can say that working together, I mean, it's an explosion of changes.
And we can say exactly the same on our side. We have had in the last 5 years, thanks to the book of Norman Doidge, a huge increase of our clientele, but many of them have in the history or have been helped by people who are doing by therapists, by practitioners. I'm Daniel, neuromovement therapists, or Feldenkrais therapists, and when talking about children, it's more ABM. I don't know many. I think we're trying to write a list, but
So
we're talking about dozens and dozens. I mean, a lot of them. And it is very, and we have good practitioners, as you know, in Toronto, but in Ottawa and Montreal and in this part of the country, we are seeing people from New York and Boston, and they are also good practitioners, as well as other places. I don't remember where, for example, Sunny is coming from, but she is also an ABM practitioner.
Louisiana?
No,
Kentucky.
Kentucky, yes. I mean, we see people from everywhere, and a lot of Nathaniel, Chicago, and it's extremely consistent. What we hear is happening, and the interface, the connection that there is between, I will say, us opening the child, more receptive, more present,
Priming the system.
if I want to use a more switched on, if you want, and then you work helping to consolidate that, which means that I already see a complementarity between the two. I'm not saying particularly, but we have mostly experience with children with, I will call it global developmental delay, as being the most of what we see. Most of the children that we see have done neural movement have the global developmental delays. Great result. We have one child we started helping. We made an exception because they were neighbors, because they were very attuned to the work we do philosophically, and they knew about it. We took a child extremely disabled, very much like the one you are talking about, very much, but we decided to take him at 1 year old. Normally we start at 2 because headphones is difficult before 2 years old. We decided 1, and we talked to the family a few weeks ago. He has done 3 rounds. All of it was done at home, 3 or 4 rounds.
I think it's 3.
3 rounds, 1 year, which means he's now 2 years old.
Yeah.
Child also very much, but more than the one we are talking about, blind, only see shade of light, I would say, but no shade. In fact, we don't really know what he sees. Too young to tell us, but he seems to be reacting to different colors of light, an object which are bright. That is a visual part, and but the auditory has picked up incredibly. Speech and language has picked up. It's incredible.
And movement. I mean, when we first met this child at 1 year old, he was laying down,
like
wasn't able to flip over. He couldn't turn himself over, was not using his legs or his arms, really just laying there. 1 year later, with ABM, he has been doing ABM and listening training that we offer. He is running. He is playing in the snow. He is really acting like a 2-year-old.
And he doesn't. The eyes do not seem to work. Which means that is, as you can see, it is, as we can imagine, is auditory vestibular system have to work over time. Update the lack of vision, and he's doing wonderfully well. He has a sense of space. He knows the subway stations, and mom is on confinement. They move around the city and go to the park, and he knows.
Confident child.
He's a child, yes. And
he's a confident. He's a very confident child now.
Yeah,
it's really beautiful.
And the diagnosis was very bleak, the prognosis, because he had some kind of a microcephalic, all those things that scare parents, and basically, self-fulfilling strategy. He's not going to go anywhere. Well, let's babysit him and hope for the best, and pray. No, they were very. They convinced us to start him at 1 year old is because they were very proactive. It's wonderful to see that.
Yeah, it's It's interesting because we always, I mean, I think whenever I see a child stepping into the room, or even if I see him over Zoom for the first time, and we will talk about it maybe later, because we have actually, the three of us together have created something new, but I usually don't even divide it to listening. What's the function that is, I mean, I can see the totality of the movement and the function of the presence in the room as the way the brain is actually manifesting itself. You can see the noise, you can see the lack of perception, you can see it. It's not, so you would imagine it's also in the frequency that he's speaking or something else. It's always connected. I never saw it that it's not manifested in all over the other lanes. I never saw it's like a dissected category that it's not working well and all the other are okay. And you can see it really great in autism, because it's like, it's a movement, neuro movement, listening, everything comes together as a kind of not detached, but maybe a chaos of stimulation or perception.
Yes. You know, like I was looking at Anna Baniel book, because I knew that we were going to talk about. And she talks first essential is movement with attention, okay? Which is basically awareness to movement. I think that it's very much the same, except that awareness is perhaps coming at the end of it, as she put it, as in fact, essential number 9, which is, but movement with attention, where listening fits. Listening is how can I call it, a facilitator of attention. We help children with attentional deficit disorder all day long. With autism, what we see happening is that these children are very, very split, very, very, very microscopic attention. Okay, if we can do anything to help a child to have just a few more seconds of attention, well, you can listen to a word from beginning to end.
Right.
The problem with language, as a difference as this picture behind me, is that when you look at this picture, you see the whole thing. It's a Gestalt. And then you can analyze, all your life if you want, all the details. But first of all, you get it all. With language, you need a time factor which go from the beginning of the word, and then the beginning of the phrase, and then the beginning of the paragraph to the end, if you want to get the message. If you do not have this time factor with you, you lost. Language is not possible for those who are the smallest, and I think autism is there, and the attentional deficit, etc., etc. You do not have enough of this attention, which means if we can increase just a little bit, and then a little bit more, and then a little bit more, the attention span by facilitate by giving a better listening, which we call listening, we winners. And that's what we do. And that facilitates the child life, the parents' connection, the therapies that they are going through, school, etc.
Yeah. You can almost say that, no, not almost, but that the brain is actually becoming better. It's mapping better with each. I mean, the change, the foreseeable, the thing that you can see maybe is a small word, but the brain has to make plenty of new connections to make it available, and then you have like an upper level or up level of ability to learn. So then the next thing will maybe you'll pick up even faster and more accurate. Would you say it's, yeah?
In fact, the brain, it's very interesting, like the work of Mesernick, that you probably know about, in neuroplasticity. The early work of Mesernick was on cochlear implant. Okay?
Right.
What I found extraordinary with cochlear implant is that I would say about, let's say, a sophisticated implant is about, I don't know exactly the number, 35 electrodes distributed all around the cochlea, inside the cochlea, to replace what the cochlea, the cell, the air cells, the corticels are doing. Okay, 35 of them are enough to inform the brain. It's like with 35 cells, 35 corticels, you can inform the brain, which means the brain is capable of filling the gaps.
Exactly.
But the brain needs the information.
Right.
And I'm going to go even further. If the brain doesn't have the information, I always say the brain like clear message. If the brain doesn't have the information, it's going to find another way to get it. If the brain has an information which is distorted, if the brain, that's not parking, what's the name of the, seeing blue-green. Okay? If the brain got a mixed information, the whole learning process is going to be mixed. It's a little bit like CP, where you ask a muscle to do something and it does something else. That is what's happening at the sensory level, and multiply that to all the sensory modalities to understand what these kids are going through. The brain is a fantastic machine, but it needs clear messages. We know with another part of the work of Mesernik and Paul Madaule, the speech pathologist who work with him, with whom they develop fast forward. We know that if you elongate it electronically a phonemes, it's going to sound different. What happened to someone who has an elongated way of listening, slow auditory processing? Well, it's going to hear he, a, o, a, etc., etc. Which is what accent is about, by the way. We have a different speed of processing the information from a language to another because the phonetic content of each language is different. Longer in Slavic languages, shorter in Spanish languages, etc., Latin languages, etc. Which means that the brain, I always, people were criticizing Tomatis because he didn't really talk about the brain. He always talked about the ear, like if the ear was doing the job of the brain. But he was looking at the ear as a facilitator for the job, for the brain doing its job. That's the way, and that is what you are doing with differentiating movement with the Feldenkrais work. And I would have liked to be a little fly, but I don't know if you know, but Feldenkrais and Tomatis knew each other.
Yeah, I think we were talking about it, yeah.
And I would have liked to hear those conversations.
The conversation.
When I read the two of them, I see there are quite a lot of similarity in philosophy.
Yeah.
And they have something more in similar. They went both to the Sorbonne.
Yeah. Yes.
In common. Yeah.
Same years, right? Same era, more or less. I think they were,
it's interesting because Feldenkrais, I never met him, unfortunately, but I was in Toronto in the last years where he was giving lectures. And because he was keep coming back, I was very busy starting this work after coming.
Yeah, I remember this.
And say, okay, I will go to the next workshop. Next workshop, he was dead. And that's the way I'd never met Feldenkrais.
You almost met him.
Knew him very well, but from Paris, not from Toronto.
Matty, you want to tell us a little bit about maybe what we're doing today, our concept?
Yes, we would like to know what you're doing.
Yeah, sure. We're playing with the constraint of COVID and the pandemic, and which has limited our ability to get in person with the children and families. And we're finding, it sounds like you are as well, that there's actually a lot of opportunity to adapt to those conditions and find new opportunities. So we're doing that through really using Zoom primarily to apply the quality, the principles of our work, which is, like you say, movement with attention, refining our ability to sense differences and differentiation, all these other kind of aspects of our work, but we're applying that more through the parent-child relationship in the home, which is, of course, the primary context in which the child is developing their sense of self, their experience of what they how they perceive the world and what they can do. And during the pandemic, it's even more because all other sort of relationships and contexts are more limited. It's even more potent in terms of that being the context, the developmental context of the child. So that's something we're exploring, and it's been really interesting. And it sounds like you're working remotely in new and innovative ways as well. So
yes, well, what we have done, what we discovered, there are a lot of people doing Tomatis work, and I'm not going to talk about any individual. I respect individual, but in general, when people present themselves, they sometimes give an impression of what they do, which may not be necessarily the right impression. Starting with Tomatis. Tomatis was talking about the ear. One of his books is The Ear in Language, another book, The Conscious Ear, which means that people say, oh, Tomatis doesn't know anything about the brain. He only knows about the ear. Well, I know Tomatis well enough to know that if he would have lived 5 years longer, he would have written a book on the brain. He wanted to do that, and he was talking about that all the time. But he was looking at it from a certain perspective.
Yeah.
What I find sometimes about the work of sound stimulation in general, based on the work of Tomatis, is that people have learned one lesson, but they forget another one. They learn the lesson, what we call receptive listening. Put headphones on children's ear, make them listen to music, and you are going to see changes, and life is going to be beautiful. I exaggerate because it's not exactly that, but that is what people perceive. The work of Tomatis, as I was saying before, started as work on voice. Tomatis was the doctor, if you want, of singers of the Opera of Paris. His father was an opera singer, and he had as a clientele, all the singers, and by extension, actors, movie people, from Depardieu, who in his autobiography wrote a full chapter of Tomatis helping him getting out of his stuttering and increasing his auditory memory because he could not remember text, to other people that he helped. It was voice. And then one day he bumped into something. He had to do a job with people who were maybe not, they didn't know, but because they were working, talking about the 50s, they were working in factories in noise. They were complaining of not hearing as well. And Tomatis was invited with a group of ENT specialists of the time to go and test those doctors for the Medicare system of France to see if it was a real story behind it, scientifically proven that they were losing their hearing while being exposed to noise. Okay, I mean that here we have Tomatis in the morning working with his opera singers, and in the afternoon working with his workers in factory, which are losing their ears. And when because he was so used to voice quality and so on, when he had those people he was testing with a traditional audiogram, he was hearing their voice. And then he was seeing their ear, how they present. And when he was hearing a voice like this, he was seeing that the ear were dropping in the high frequency. He was realizing that the ear was dropped in a medium range, the range of the production of the phonemes. And then he started putting two and two together. Perhaps a voice problem has to do with the way you hear. Went back to this opera singer who every 2 or 3 months were coming, I kind of see, was giving him a little bit of whatever. In fact, the first time I saw, what do you call it, sticks put in nose, is it with Tomatis, because that's the way he was helping. He was helping singers to sing that night. He was giving them xylocaine or cortisone, whatever, in the nose that they could sing while they're in the middle of a cold, because they needed to sing that night. I mean that there were ways. Okay, that was a work of Tomatis. But then he was seeing some particularly aging singers who were losing their voice more and more and more. And one day had to start retiring. That's where he started looking at the ear and realized that they didn't have a voice because the ear was lost. They could not have this feedback. And his first work was to give this feedback to singers. And because singers knew that, and then with filters and so on, make them listen as they should listen as good singers in order to produce a good voice. And because they already knew their scores and song and so on, it was quick to help them, at least temporarily, to do that. I give them the ear they should have, and then they have the voice they should have. You see, that was as easy as at the beginning. Then he started working on other people, referral, private practice, referral. He's working on stutterers, on people who had never had a good voice. Which means that then he realized that these people who never had a good voice and wanted to have a better voice needed a blueprint. They didn't have that blueprint. They didn't have that in their brain. They never had it. Which means that they need to have a ear which receive those sounds which permit you to have the voice you need to have. And that's where he started what we call in our terminology the passive or receptive phase. You listen, you improve your listening, and then it starts changing the way you listen to yourself producing the sound. And that's the loop is starting to work. And that is where which means that going back to home program, it was easy for us to give home program with listening alone. But the voice work is much more difficult, particularly with children who do not read well, do not care about the voice. How are we going to get them the voice out? Because we need that in order to reinforce what the listening has given them. Passive phase or receptive phase, we give them a ear, and then we have to attach this to the voice and feedback. Okay, that's the logic. Mm-hmm. And this is what we have discovered, not discovered, but what reinforced us in the last 9-10 months of working with COVID, which means working with Zoom and home program, is that people like Rosalind, who has a training in expressive art therapy, which means that, like a lot of people with going to neuro movement have a background in dance, and it makes a lot of sense. Okay, well, she has a background in acting, in getting the voice out of the kids, and and it's very easy to bring imagination out of kids. Not always, but when you know how to do it, if you can do it, if you can get the imagination, the imaginary work, you know how much you're going to obtain. Which means that the work was to really get them, switch them on through Zoom and do their program with a feedback, headphones on the ear, microphone in front of the mouth, singing, speaking, reading. And that's, but we never talk about the word reading. We talk about telling a story, we pop out of a box. We just make it come alive the way children like to hear things. And of course, we choose, text, which are interesting, movie script, and you cannot believe what you can get out of a kid when you know how to approach him. And Anna Baniel talked about that in her book too. She talks about imagination. She talked about enthusiasm as being some of the essential. There's so many parallels in what we are doing, but this one was particularly important because we do it all the time in the center with the kids in front of us. In fact, our kids' room looked like a stage. We had little things like some, talking to others, like a little stage, little theater. But we couldn't do it anymore. We cannot do it anymore. How do we do it? And that is where Rosalind and Morana are, with the other person who is working, have been very, very good at creating that expressive phase, active phase of the Tomatis method, which is so important to create, develop that loop which is a neuroplastic dimension of our work.
Yep.
The use it, the whatever, use it, wiring, firing, wiring, firing, wiring, firing. We have to fire to wire and fire to wire and fire, and we have to do it for a long time. And then we show the parents and the kids how to continue to do it after our program. And if things go well, they keep improving.
And I think there's something important here, that we start with where the kids are at. We work with children who are verbal and nonverbal. There's still a loop. There is still feedback, whether they're using words or not. It's about expression. That's I really want to make that clear as well.
It is about spontaneous expression.
Yes.
And if we start with woof, 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 woof,
great.
Fantastic. Because from a neurological point of view, we create the link. That's a beginning. And then you variation on the theme.
Yeah.
You widen and widen and widen. Chris Greenspan work and so. And you work too. I know what you are doing. You never push the child beyond his limit. You just go step by step by step by step. Little victories, little victories, little victories, which is what we are doing.
And catching the child where he is, it's interesting, because in many therapies, I can see that they neglecting. I mean, the child, let's say I'm working a lot with autistic kids, you can see immediately after a few days of working with them, changes in the way they're actually presence. And you see that they are looking for a minute where they didn't do it before. And then, but sometimes the speech therapist will say, this doesn't matter. We're gonna teach them how to speak. But I said, but how can you even think about language if you don't take into consideration and make it matter that the child want to engage, even if he's nonverbal?
Yes.
So you have to go where he's engaging and realize that. And I think what we're doing now, we actually created a center. We call ourselves the Moving Center. I think we surprised ourselves, right, Matty and Andrea? The results in working online, I got to the point where I think we will never lose this tool again. I mean, even when we can meet in person, travel, we all traveled a lot around the globe in the past. Even then, we're going to use online working, because the constraint is amazing, because it's creating another possibilities of freedom. It's also a concept of Feldenkrais. But I'm thinking about it, how much we use voice. I do it intentionally, because I'm coming from a background of a singer and a voice announcer, and I use it. But we all do it kind of intentionally, especially in Zoom. And the voice is traveling there, so you create anticipation and expectation. You stop, and then you start changing the accentuation and the tonation. And then you get softer and then louder. And then the child is like changing like that sometimes. It's amazing. It's amazing.
I can see we're all so excited. It's really interesting conversation. I want to jump back to something you said about spontaneity and this connection between perception and the intention, or the child's desire to communicate, to use their voice. And when I think about voice and the kind of function of voice, I go to this, the communication and the desire, the intention to connect, to express something from inside to the other people in the environment, right? And when we work, it's interesting, because when we think about this relationship between perception or sensing, like refining a child's ability to feel how they touch the floor with their foot, and how the ankle and the toes can adapt and can begin to transmit the force from the floor through them. But we always go to intention, and the intention of the child to do something as being like when they push with their foot, just to push with the foot, it's not the same as when they want to go and reach and touch the mom's face or grab the ball. Like the desire to act and to engage in the world is what kind of connects that loop between perception and action. And I love what you're talking about in terms of communication and the passive phase of listening, and then hearing yourself and turning that, getting that connection, that cycle working, and then the spontaneous expression of self can be freed up. And that is how we think of movement. Like, we're looking for the perception, the sense. When I'm talking about now, when we're working in person, it's a little different on Zoom, but it's true also in the relationship too. Like, when we work on Zoom, as a child's feedback and the environment gets clearer, gets more distinct, and they're able to sense themselves with more clarity, and then they can connect that to their desire to engage, their desire to act. But that is what kind of reinforces and collects the learning and progresses them to the next level.
We actually always say that how can a child develop or make sense of relationships or their environment if they don't yet have a sense of themselves? How there's no connection if there's no connection within the self, right?
I think that is a very also Feldenkrais insight. The sense of yourself is the beginning of the sense of other. And that is what the autistic child is suffering from. He doesn't have a sense of self. They don't know where their hand is. They don't know where their voice is. It just flies around. They don't have a sense of time. I remember an autistic child, we had 2 watches just to be sure that one is not going to stop, because without that, she's going to be lost out of time. You know, like this is this sense of self, this body image, body integration, body awareness is the beginning of relating to other. And when we work with the auditory vestibular, you get the 2 together. I think the ear is a sense which, of course, I'm talking for my church, but the way I see it is a sense which has an antenna out in the world around and an antenna in. It's the same sense. I know that I'm talking to converted here, but very often I'm saying to groups, don't separate in your mind the vestibular system and the cochlear system. They are the same. When the sound reaches the inner ear from the oval window, the first stimulation it gives on the fluid in the inner ear is a vestibular stimulation. It stimulates the vestibular first, and then it goes to the cochlea. Because that is anatomy. Go to any, or physiology, go to any book and you will see it. But nobody has taken that to its logical implication. And not nobody, but very few.
Yeah, I just had this image. I just remember those times when I get out of the pool or the ocean, when my ears, I really like plugged, everything is plugged. I cannot hear everything, like muffled. Mm-hmm. And how disoriented I become on the spot. Everything is like, yeah. And just imagine how a child can feel when he's always like that, or most of the time like that.
Absolutely. It's like being on a bit, I wrote a book many years ago, and I compare being on a rocking boat, having to take picture on a tripod, which is on a rocking boat. You can do it, but it's going to take so much energy, so much effort, so much frustration for so little result. Because how many birds are you going to miss by doing that and trying to see them? This is what those kids are suffering from. They are on the rocking boat all the time.
And they're actually learning how to fail, and they're not succeeding. So this is another layer that you get. It's getting rooted again and again. I cannot understand.
That's why we should not ask them. And I know it's same with us and the same with you. We should not ask them what they are not able to do.
Right.
Just celebrate the meow, and even if the meow takes 1 month, and wow, fantastic, but don't have in mind, but he's 4 years old, he should say much more than meow. Well, celebrate what you have to get him to open the way to something else, to the next step. Otherwise, and parents, of course, they want the best for the child, and they are under the pressure of having a child performing, but the more they try going that route, the more they reinforce failure posture.
Yeah.
And we know that. I mean, that's,
yeah.
And that's also the work we're doing with the parents all the time. Counseling, parental counseling is a very, very, very important part of our work. I would say that 80% of my time as a clinician is spent with the parents when the child is, is doing his program with
right.
and the microphone.
I guess that's what we're doing now over Zoom. Because this was the challenge always. I mean, always when I worked with the kids, and I know also Meti, we were colleagues, and Andrea. So I had to take some of my attention to work with the parents, but it's hard to do at the same time, you know. And then now it's a great opportunity to work only on that, and they can see slowly or even fast that it's without touching and just changing their way of understanding the space in which them and the child is together, and how to change it by understanding it. It's such a great result. So I understand it will not go by looking and focusing on fixing on what's not working, but only the celebration, as you say, is working there.
So important.
Sometimes it's really important to separate the parents, or especially the mother, from the child, because of a traumatic experience of that child has been really sick and really maybe a preemie. So the whole attention has been around that child, and it's occupying sometimes. So it has to become separate again, and so the child can develop a sense of itself. So that is sometimes some work too, so that the mother sees that she can be separate from the child and just help the child learn.
You're talking about habitual kind of attachment, kind of overprotection or something.
Yeah, not even knowing that they occupy the child. If I say occupation, I mean it's like not allowing the child to make any experience because of fear, like fear of falling. So don't roll over too far. You might hurt yourself, and catch it immediately, not giving it any chance to recognize it, to make to get to know his environment. So that is also quite important.
It's interesting. When I was looking at Danielle books, she's talking about enthusiasm, or in her enthusiasm essential, not to be confused with positive reinforcement, which I find very interesting because it's true. Every time a child is doing something, the whole room is they concentrate the child. You take him away from the very thing, and perhaps you make him aware of something that he was doing just by fluke, and that is the way children learn. Which means that be enthusiastic, yes, and we are to death. But let's be careful not to stage it a little bit too much. Children are not stupid; they know.
This speaks to many. Look, I also come from. I brought my kids in an unschooling environment. So I believe in natural learning. So I get a lot from there. And one of the things that I have done is actually had to learn, not at the beginning, they come to see it, to show something. Look, I've done this. We think it's beautiful. And I'm trying to be honest, but I'm inhibiting the need to say, yeah, great. Because I mean, what do they care if daddy is thinking it's great or not? One time I made a mistake and I said, this is great. And she came like doing the same drawing over and over and coming, and then I just learned how to say, oh, it's interesting, you used green and black. Did you mean, I mean, I'm taking it away, shifting it away from reinforcing positivity or what I think. Don't make it social. I wanted to stay within the experience, not trying to please me. Because when you say this, you're also preparing the next failure, because you have to, every time you have to be like that. Otherwise, and it's all high tension, and it's not really learning. I mean, it's learning, but it's not really kind of a self-experience.
Yeah, and that kind of attention, that kind of orientation, it takes the child away from their own perception, their own sense of their action. We're working with that. I'm a parent also, so it's I know that from the inside as well, in terms of what you're talking about, Eitan, bringing ourselves back to how we can support the child to stay in tune with their experience, to stay curious, to stay engaged. And like you're saying, starting with the meow, it's like we start with the meow, and then we see where we can play in there. And from there, they can grow, and they can become, many more different kinds of animals.
You can do a lot with a meow. You can make it, you can double it, meow, meow. You can change the tone, meow, 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 meow. Yeah. You can go faster, you can go slower. All those things are basically opening the spectrum of the child.
This is exciting for me, I think, because I'm listening also from a listening perspective, also from my expressive arts therapy training. And this is exactly what I do with my work with the kids, is that it's all about being aware in the moment, working with where the kid is at, and staying on the surface of the art is an expressive arts therapy term in which we're not interested in interpretation. We're not interested in the product. It's all about the process. So keeping that child in the experience, and kind of what you were saying about creating those dynamics of, ooh, what can we do if we add some green? Or what do we do if we make the meow quiet? Or what if the meow is a woof? It's all about those fine little details and staying in the experience with them, and ultimately cultivating their sense of themselves, giving them the options and the choices, and curiosity is so important.
Keeping the child switched on, keeping the child listening, keeping the child attentive, grabbing, it's, for me, the act of listening is very physical. I compare it to a frog with a tongue, picking up the insect and bringing it back. It's sensory motor, and you have to do things, and that's where you're so good, and we have to be good at is getting it out of them, and they get fun, but making it through fun, through big love, and it works. I can assure you it works. I mean,
I'm not afraid to make a fool of myself.
Yeah, we do that regularly as well. But even as you're talking, I was playing with or noticing the difference between different ways I could listen. Like I could listen to you in a way where I'm thinking like, what am I going to say, and where am I going? How does this relate to that? And I sort of start to kind of disengage. Or I could be this kind of open, like receiving your what you're like the kind of like the fly, but you're shooting something out at me, and I'm open to it. I'm interested and engaged with it. So, and those two different experiences have a very different physicality to them, and it's really interesting to notice that in myself, even in this conversation.
Yeah, as soon as Rosalind started doing this quiet, I started to have this mirror neurons coming. Like I started doing
your body moving.
Yeah, I started doing it. I mean, I was in this. I think this is what actors doing all the time, right? And singers. And this is why once I remember in the past when I used to teach groups, when I wanted adults, when I wanted them to just relax, I started going to the bass and monotonous, and then everybody's like cannot say, or if you can enrich your voice, and then you can up them, and it's immediately impacting the tonus of the muscles and everything.
So many connections. So interesting.
Yeah.
I'm interested in what you said before at the beginning by passing. You said something about self-image, and you connected it to lower tones.
Yes.
Am I correct?
Vestibular.
I think before you start that, I have a call, so I actually have to leave.
Okay.
But thank you all.
So nice to meet you.
It's been a pleasure speaking.
Thank you, Rosalind.
You as well,
Rosalind. Bye-bye.
Yes, it's the lower frequency is body image. It's a sense of the body. It's as you know, if you want to put someone on a trance, and you just just rhythm and bass, and rhythm in itself, it's a low frequency, because when we are talking about frequency, we are talking about a cycle per second, and movement is physical movement. What I'm saying is that sound is a movement. And the more you go towards a lower sound, the more you go into movement which moves the body. Okay, which means that on our listening test, which is basically very much like an audiogram that you go to, you can even go to Costco now to get it down. You know, like we look at it differently. We are not looking at it from the point of view where the thresholds are, and if they are that level you hear, if that level you need hearing aid. We are looking at it qualitatively, which means that's what we call it a listening test. And we are looking at the low frequency range, the medium range, and the high range. Low frequency informs us of body representation. For example, if you have a child who has low frequency at a certain level and another level on the right ear and other level on the left, you have a child who is on a rocking boat, as I was describing before. If you have a child who hears low frequency and high frequency well, but has a little bit of a drop, and the drop can be only 10, 15 decibel. It's still within the normal range for the doctor, for the audiologist. But 10 to 15 decibel, when you look at it as a logarithmic value, is 10 to 50 times less, which means that it's like being on a road where you cannot pass. You see the road 500 meters from here, you see it in front of your car, but there is a valley you cannot pass. Well, that is because you don't know if they're car or not car. Well, that is what a curvature in the medium range does to the child hearing. It doesn't hear language. Well, this doesn't hear it well. He hears, very distracting, the feet of the other kids in the classroom and so on. He hears, the air conditioning and things like this. In the middle is, if you don't know that, you see the child is distracted. He had the ADHD. If he's more of an introvert side, he's going to be ADD, the daydreamer, the one who spends his life looking at through the window. Or if he's an ADHD, he's an extrovert who is pushing, picking, because it doesn't have anything to do with what's going on in the room, because it doesn't get it. Now, not all ADHD at that, but that take care of 60% of them.
Can you talk about hypotonic kids with hypotonia, like in Down syndrome or other genetical disorder, and the connection to the ear, to stimulation the ear?
And particularly the high frequency. Those children, the hypo child is a child who needs a lot of stimulation in general, okay, for work on the muscle. But as far as sound stimulation, it's more the higher frequency stimulation without ignoring the low frequency. But it needs to be stimulated in a wider, we call it densified sound with some low content, but enriched in the high frequency. And we can help them to a point. I'm not saying that it's a perfect turnaround. They need other support like what you do, but we help them facilitate muscle tonus. That is something that we see, for example, with Down syndrome. We see that the child who cannot speak simply because his muscle tone or tonus is too low. We know that there is about 18, I think it's about 18 muscle in the tongue or something like this. Well, if they are not, you cannot move the tongue. You cannot produce sound which is crisp. And when we see in Down syndrome, which really the tone is really an issue, we see the child, first of all, try to produce sound more, faster, but still doesn't have the equipment to do it. The tone is still too low, which means that the speech increase, but very often turn into some kind of stuttering at the beginning. We warn the parent that it might happen before he moves to another level. And then sometimes more often than not, we see the tongue coming in, the drooling decreasing, and all the tone of that part, opening, closing, it is starting to awaken, as well as a little bit the face expression, which is of course hypotonic as well in the case of Down. We see, particularly when we start them young. We don't only have to start them young, but as you know, we have better results when you start young.
Right. They have less experience to be with who they are.
Yes, I have a child who I started because I had helped 3 other kids in the family. Mom came one day, she was pregnant and fine, and then one day they told me, we are going to have a child with a trisomic, and we decided to accept him and say, okay, well, as soon as 2 years old, because that's the rule. In fact, we start a little bit earlier. And now she's 18, which means that, you know, because I've been working long enough in Toronto, 42 years now, I can see like this generation of people growing and developing. This girl is absolutely beautiful. Speech is good. She still needs a lot of stimuli. She's the exercise and so on. Mom, it's interesting because Mom during a time she wasn't doing Feldenkrais, but she was doing, you know, the institute in Philadelphia to help her, the work of Dorman. You know, I don't know if you know that work.
Oh yeah.
She was doing that, as you know, is extremely constraining for the parent. Mom had a car accident, head injury, which put her out of her commission for a few months. And I saw the tone of the girl going down.
Right.
Then we brought her back. Mom continued with the exercise and so on, and it went back. But it was interesting that when the exercise, the stimulation was decreasing, I could see the child posture, speech, awakening, you know, awakeness, if you want, diminish. So it's quite interesting.
Something I'm thinking about in this conversation, just reflecting on your story, your personal story, and how you took, you know, your experience and you followed, you followed a thread and you got interested and you kind of stayed with it and you created something and you connected, of course, with Tomatis, who was a guide, but this it's almost like this improvisational or spontaneous following the kind of what the universe has given you, and then creating something really rich and valuable out of it. And it made me think about my own interest in this work. And I got into Feldenkrais initially, and then an Opiniel method, and how like my interest in development and in working with children and families, it really comes from something like the ways that I experienced myself as a child and my environment, right? And how we all can kind of, I guess, be either kind of reactive and kind of move away from those elements of ourselves or of our experience, or we can kind of follow them and get interested in and engage and create something valuable and something rich. And I think in some ways that's kind of what we're trying to do with the children. Like we're starting with where they are, and we're interested in how they perceive, how they experience themselves, and then we're following that and elaborating and letting it lead to something new and staying attuned to that developmental process, both for ourselves but also for the children and the families.
Well, I think our first university is ourselves. And then going to school and then university, in case we go, is to formalize that, and perhaps to have the paper to be able to allow ourselves to do what we really want to do. I have to say, since I met Tomatis and when I saw what happened, I just wanted to share it. And my dearest wish is that people like Rosalind, people like Morana are going to take it over. We have a shelf time, and I brought this work to Canada, and it has been successful, I think, in going with up and down. It's not easy. It's not easy because we are a little bit out of the box when it comes to recognition by other professionals. But that said, it's gathering momentum, and I just hope that this is going to go somewhere else. But that has been really the motivational engine of my life. It's transmit what did work for me to others and transmitting it in the essence of it. And this active, receptive voice work. And I'm always surrounded with people like Rosalind, because they are interested in voice, spontaneous motivation to get the voice out, because I know that is what's going to create the loop. When we do that with an autistic child, we have incredible results. Not always having them verbal and talking. We're not out there for fixes. We are there to bring them beyond what people were thinking they could.
Yeah.
Perhaps beyond, except for the parents. The parents have a vision. I respect a lot parents. They have an intuition on the child, particularly the mothers, but not always, but which I use very much as a guide. Quite often.
Sometimes they would have the experience of shutting their intuition down because of the medical world
absolutely
advices or warning or whatever.
Limits, and that is where we have to be helping them to even when we don't know where the limits limits, you see on myself, even when we don't know where it's going to go, there is always the possibility for more.
Yeah, it's like the model. If your model is like, what are the deficits? Then you're looking at the limits.
Yes.
And if your model is like, what are the capacities? What are the possibilities? Then you're looking at something else entirely.
Yeah.
Which means that we work a lot, as you can imagine, and like you do it yourself, reframing parents' perspective.
Yes.
And very often we touch them in their intuition, which means we have a captive audience. And when you can produce a result, I would say relatively quickly, then you have a doubly motivated captive audience. Okay, you know what you're talking about, and okay, I'm with you now.
It's actually changing. You change a perspective, and then you reframe. It's actually giving you a totally different other experience and results. There's a great method. Few Israeli guys invented it like 20, 30 years ago, called the systematic innovative thinking. I don't know if you heard about it. They have a great book called it's Jacob Goldberg. It calls thinking inside the box. So sometimes when you constrain deliberately, you constrain the frame. So okay, this is, you can look at the boundaries and as Matti said, the limits, or you can look at the content and what already is there, and just use that. Sometimes even constraining deliberately, you get a lot of freedom. And working with the parents, sometimes it's a lot about that, changing the perspective. You're looking from outside the box, or you're trying to get out of the box, but let's see what's going on here. What is really going on, not what you want. It's without, I'm not telling them not to wish, but look at what the child is already doing. Yes. Don't dismiss it, because we dismiss it sometimes because of the outside world saying this is not enough because it's not meeting its milestones or whatever, yeah, right? But what and how is he really doing? Just observe this. And this is it's almost mystical, but it's not. It's the brain. You nourish it, you look at it with respect, and you quietly being enthusiastic about it, then it grows. And if you're not, it's not.
Yes.
That's the way, I think we use it a lot in our kind of way of thinking when we work with also in person, but
we do. And speaking of parents, I have to jump off to get my children pretty soon.
Okay.
Is there anything else?
I don't have children, but I have also other things waiting for me.
Okay. Yeah, but it's been an incredible, rich pleasure to be with you and to be in this conversation. So thank you, Eitan, for connecting us, and thank you for being open to sharing with us.
And thank you for your interest. I'm always very, very sensitive to professionals, other professionals showing interest to the work we do. Very often I've felt very much in a desert for a long, like walking on my own. It's not that it happens, of course, but it's not as often as I would like, which means that a little gathering like this one, thank you very much. Thank you for your listening.
Thank you for your willingness, and I think that for the parents out there or professionals that doesn't know, we actually, the connection between the two methods, I mentioned it before, is really great. And if you don't know about the listening therapy, the listening program, then it's a great thing to do it, by itself, or better yet, just doing with combination with Feldenkrais or ABM. We're certainly supported, and we can see results already with the combination. So you're located in Toronto, right?
Toronto,
do you have any branches? Do you have any branches?
No, not right now. No, we are in Toronto, and but now with with a Zoom and home program with portable equipment, we can branch out anywhere we need, really. And we have, the portable equipment we have had for more than 20 years, but we were using it more as a reinforcement, what we call boosts, when people, particularly for people coming from far away. Now we are much more systematic. And I believe that we are going to continue, even after COVID, the home program concept format is going to continue. That will permit us to downsize our center. In fact, we are going to move, that COVID also, we are going to move to a smaller facility, very close to where we are right now. If you know Toronto, we are at the Spadina and Harvard, right close to the University of Toronto. We are going to be right in the next location. We're going to be right in the University of Toronto ground, not in the university, but in the geographic ground of the University of Toronto.
I would be curious if Tomatis is being taught in schools somehow, because that would be so wonderful to have both our methods taught in schools, where children sitting like me, I was sitting in school and I could watch the blackboard, and even if I was sitting in the last row, I was losing them. I was losing the sound. I could just see or listen. So
it's interesting what you're saying. I don't want to keep going, but for 5 years, the first 5 years I spent in Toronto from 1979 to 1984, Dr. Tomatis was 3 of these 5 years in Toronto, 6 months a year. And the goal was to establish this work in the school system. We failed miserably. We were not able to do it. There were so many quote unquote obstacles. That we not by lack of trying, it's very difficult, which means we have been in Montessori school, in some school, but as a system, we were not able to.
We're encountering the same. I mean, we have some openings, and I tried before. As a systematic thing, it's hard, but anecdotal, like once in a while, occasional, I was able, but it's hard.
We were in school like 10 years in the Toronto Montessori school. Very good work. Sudbury separate school board for 10 years. Extraordinary work. But the day the director of the school board retired and another, the whole thing went down. That was a story of the school system. Our relationship with the school system has always been difficult. And I have to say, since there is more than 30 years that I am not actively trying. Perhaps I should have tried more, but I didn't. I have to confess, I was so turned off by the original experience that I didn't really put more energy into it.
Yeah, so maybe Rosalind's generation can.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's what I'm hoping. Yeah. Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Avec plaisir. Avec grand plaisir.
All right. Bye, Paul. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Paul.